He pulled the microphone out of another man's hand, mid-song, in front of thousands of people. That's how a Motown legend tried to steal his old group back, walking on stage uninvited, embarrassing the men who'd replaced him, daring them to throw him out in front of the crowd that still loved him most.
Baby, 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 don't leave me.
Down the hall from him, a teenage girl was told she wasn't allowed on stage anymore. No warning. No goodbye tour. Just a man at the side of the curtain saying, "If you go out there, I'll pull you off myself." These are the moments nobody puts in the highlight reel. The firings, the lawsuits, the brothers who stopped speaking. The phone calls that ended a friendship for good. 12 of the greatest R&B groups in history, in 12 different ways they came apart at the seams. Our first story begins with how fame, ego, addiction, conflict, and tragedy can slowly tear apart even the greatest groups in music history. The Temptations. Ain't Too Proud to Beg, 1968. Reason for breakup. David Ruffin's ego and drug use got him fired in 1968. He kept storming the stage uninvited for years afterward, and the group lost 4 of its 5 original members to early deaths. Picture 5 guys from Detroit in matching suits, working a 4-headed microphone stand like it's choreography from another planet. That's the image. That's the legend. What almost nobody remembers is that the very first member fired from the Temptations wasn't some superstar. It was Elbridge Al Bryant, gone after he hit a bandmate with a beer bottle during a drunken backstage fight. A teenager named David Ruffin walked in to replace him. Nobody knew yet that this swap would define and eventually destroy the group. Ruffin became the voice behind My Girl and Ain't Too Proud to Beg. And the bigger he got, the more he believed he deserved a different name on the marquee. He started showing up to gigs in his own private limousine with his girlfriend, Motown singer Tammy Terrell, while the rest of the group rode together like they always had. He demanded the group be billed as David Ruffin and the Temptations. When Motown said no, he started demanding to see the books. By 1968, his bandmates had had enough, and they voted him out. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Ruffin started appearing at Temptation shows uninvited, walking on stage mid-song during My Girl, yanking the microphone out of new singer Dennis Edwards' hands, and performing his old parts in front of a crowd that ate it up. It happened over and over. The group would later attempt a full reunion with Ruffin in 1982, and it collapsed within months, as Ruffin missed show after show, high on cocaine, costing the group thousands in fines until he was fired again, this time for good. Founding member Paul Williams never got that far. Sickle cell disease and alcoholism forced him out of the group in 1971, and 2 years later, he was found dead in a car near Motown's old studio, a gunshot wound to the head. Officially ruled a suicide, though his own family questioned it for decades. Eddie Kendricks would leave next over creative disputes, and Ruffin himself would die in 1991 of a drug overdose, after a tour where the proceeds in his money belt mysteriously vanished. One group, 5 original members, 4 of them gone long before their time, and a feud that played out on stage in front of paying fans. This is just the beginning. The next chapter takes a very different turn, one centered on a decision that changed everything almost overnight. Earth, Wind, and Fire. Reasons, 1983. Reason for breakup. Maurice White abruptly put the band on an indefinite hiatus in 1983, devastating members financially. He was later sidelined by Parkinson's disease until his death in 2016. In 1983, after over a dozen albums and 6 Grammys, the leader of one of the most beloved bands in music history did something almost unthinkable. He sent everyone home. No farewell tour. No press conference explaining why. Just an indefinite hiatus, announced to a band that had built their entire adult lives around playing music together.
Julie.
Maurice White had founded Earth, Wind, and Fire as a teenager's dream, fusing jazz, funk, gospel, and African rhythm into something nobody else was doing, with his younger brother Verdine on bass and falsetto singer Philip Bailey carrying songs like Reasons into the stratosphere. By the early 80s, they had sold tens of millions of records and were filling stadiums the way rock bands did. Then came 1983's Electric Universe, a commercial flop, and White's decision to shut it all down. What happened to the band members in the silence that followed was the part nobody saw coming. Bailey later wrote in his memoir that the breakup was a nightmare for almost everyone but White. Band members lost their homes. Some had nervous breakdowns and went into counseling. Drummer Ralph Johnson had to take a construction job installing fire sprinklers just to make rent.
Sing exactly the way you want to, then you gotta put on some Earth, Wind, and Fire, all right?
And the wreckage wasn't just financial. Maurice and his own brother Verdine reportedly weren't even speaking during the worst of it. Two brothers who'd built an empire together, suddenly unable to be in the same room. The band eventually found its way back in the late 80s, but the second blow was already coming. White began struggling with exhaustion that turned out to be early Parkinson's disease, a diagnosis he kept hidden from the public for nearly a decade. He stopped touring in the mid-90s, made one final appearance for the band's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 2000, and then largely disappeared from view until his death in 2016. The band he built kept going without him, but the man who held the whole vision together spent his final 2 decades watching from the sidelines as the disease slowly took away the body that used to move a room. What happened to our next artist still sparks questions decades later. Kool and the Gang, Cherish, 1988. Reason for breakup: lead singer J.T. Taylor's amicable solo departure in 1988, followed by a long string of member deaths. The band simply absorbed, without ever officially disbanding.
But love will stand the test of time.
Most bands break up once, and that's the story. Kool and the Gang's story is the opposite. A band that simply would not stop, no matter how many times life tried to take it apart. Brothers Robert and Ronald Bell started the group as teenagers in Jersey City. So poor growing up that Ronald once missed an entire year of school because his family couldn't afford shoes. They built their first percussion instruments out of empty paint cans.
As long as we both shall live.
By the late 70s, the band's jazz-funk instrumental sound was running out of gas. Disco was eating their lunch, and they made a gamble, bringing in a school teacher named James J.T. Taylor to be their first real frontman. It worked instantly. Ladies' Night, then Celebration, then Cherish turned a struggling jazz-funk outfit into one of the best-selling soul groups of the decade. And then in 1988, at the absolute height of their fame, Taylor walked away to go solo, quietly, with no public blow-up, simply choosing to stop being a footnote to his own voice. The band carried on without him, and that's when the real losses started. Guitarist Charles Smith died after a long illness in 2006. Trumpeter Robert Spike Mickens died in a nursing home in 2010. Trombonist Clifford Adams died of cancer in 2015, with no health insurance to help cover the cost, despite decades in one of the most successful bands in R&B history. Then came the gut punch. In September 2020, co-founder Ronald Bell, the man who had written Celebration itself, died suddenly at his home. Less than a year later, saxophonist Dennis Thomas died in his sleep. Robert Kool Bell is the last founding member standing, and he has buried nearly every person he started this band with as a teenager in Jersey City. And yet Kool and the Gang never officially broke up. Not after Taylor left, not after the deaths kept coming. They just kept finding a way to put a new lineup on stage, year after year, because stopping was apparently never an option Robert Bell was willing to consider. This next story reminds us that sometimes groups aren't broken apart by conflict, but by time itself. The Jackson 5, I Want You Back, 1975. Reason for breakup: royalty disputes and a fight for creative control drove the group to leave Motown for Epic Records in 1975, triggering a lawsuit over the group's name and Jermaine staying behind. Before there was a king of pop, there were 5 brothers from Gary, Indiana, singing under streetlights for spare change. managed by a father who pushed them harder than almost any group in music history. Motown turned them into the first act ever to send their first 4 singles straight to #1. And then Motown's own business practices became the reason the group fell apart. The brothers discovered they were earning less than 3 cents on every dollar their records made. They asked for creative control, the ability to write and produce their own material as they grew older, and Motown said no. By 1975, the Jacksons had made up their minds to leave for Epic Records, where they were offered a real royalty rate and the freedom Motown refused to give them. Berry Gordy responded the way he usually did when an act tried to walk, with a lawsuit. Motown owned the name the Jackson 5 outright, and the label made sure the brothers couldn't take it with them. The group was forced to rename themselves the Jacksons, just to keep performing as a unit at all, stripped of the very name that had made them famous, mid-career, in the middle of a courtroom fight. And the lawsuit fractured something even more personal than the brand. Jermaine Jackson, married to Berry Gordy's own daughter, made the choice to stay loyal to Motown rather than follow his brothers out the door, and was replaced in the lineup by youngest brother Randy. It would take 8 years and the Motown 25 television special for Jermaine to even share a stage with his brothers again. By then, the family that left as the Jackson 5 had become something else entirely. 5 children who'd been turned into a corporate battleground, a famous name they no longer owned, and a brother who chose a record label's loyalty over his own family's exit. Michael, of course, would go on to dwarf all of it, but the group that raised him never fully recovered the unity it lost in that courtroom. This next ending may be the most graceful on our list. Gladys Knight and the Pips, Midnight Train to Georgia, 1989. Reason for breakup: an amicable 1989 split as Gladys Knight pursued a solo career after 37 years together. No scandal, no lawsuit. The gentlest ending in this countdown.
I'd rather live in his world.
A broken record player at a 10th birthday party. That's how Gladys Knight and the Pips actually began in 1952. A family of siblings and cousins entertaining themselves in Atlanta because the music had stopped, only to discover they didn't need the record player at all. Gladys, her brother Bubba, and their cousins built decades of harmony out of that one accident.
I'd rather live in his world than...
For most of their run, this was a story of resilience rather than collapse. Motown treated them as a second string act behind bigger stars like the Supremes. And Gladys later said Diana Ross had her bumped from a tour because audiences responded too well to her opening set. The group eventually left Motown for Buddha Records, found their signature sound, and delivered Midnight Train to Georgia, the song that finally made them legends in their own right rather than someone else's opening act. But success brought its own slow bleed. Legal disputes with their label forced Gladys and the 3 Pips to record separately for 2 full years in the late 70s, splitting up a unit that had performed as one voice since childhood. And behind the music, Gladys was fighting something no one in the audience could see: a gambling addiction that, by her own account, once cost her $60,000 in a single night at a casino table before she finally sought help through Gamblers Anonymous. In 1989, after 37 years together, the group made the rare choice to walk away on their own terms. No lawsuit, no public falling out. Gladys wanted a solo career, and the Pips, William Guest and Edward Patton, quietly accepted it and moved into music production instead.
I'll be with him. I know you will. Oh, let me...
It is one of the gentlest endings in this entire countdown. But even the quiet ones leave a mark. Edward Patton lost both his legs to diabetes before he died in 2005, and William Guest carried the group's legacy until his own death a decade later. The last voice of a family that started singing because the record player broke. We're at the halfway point of this countdown, and the stories are about to get heavier. If you're new here, welcome. This channel digs into the real, often painful history behind the music you grew up loving, the parts the liner notes never mention. If any of these stories have hit you tonight, do us a favor and hit subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Now back to the breakups, because the next 6 groups get a lot more personal. We arrive at a story where success itself became the catalyst for change. The Commodores, Easy, 1982. Reason for breakup: Lionel Richie's solo success pulled him away from the group in 1982, compounded by the death of longtime manager Benny Ashburn the same year.
I paid my dues to make it.
They met as college freshmen at Tuskegee Institute In 1968, a group of friends who started out covering other people's songs at fraternity parties for beer money. Nobody in that room could have predicted that one of them would go on to write some of the biggest pop songs of the 1980s, or that his success would be exactly what tore the group apart. Lionel Richie's voice and songwriting turned the Commodores from a funk band known for Brick House into a hit-making machine, with ballads like Easy, 3 Times a Lady, and Sail On carrying them to the top of the charts. But success outside the group started pulling at him.
You see a big stone and a bottle.
He wrote Lady for Kenny Rogers in 1980. He recorded Endless Love with Diana Ross in 1981. Both became massive hits. And Richie said the moment that truly broke something inside him was reading a music review that asked, point blank, what a singer like him was even doing in a funk band like the Commodores. In 1982, the band itself suggested Richie record a solo album, a decision that, in hindsight, set his exit in motion. He has said publicly that he never actually wanted to leave the Commodores, that the group was all he'd known since college, and that walking away from bandmates like Thomas McClary and William King felt like leaving a second family.
Yeah.
But one solo album became 2, then 3, and the Commodores' co-lead singer became a global superstar in his own right almost overnight. The same year Richie departed, the band's longtime manager, Benny Ashburn, the man who had guided them from frat parties to arena stages, died of a heart attack at 54, meaning the Commodores lost their voice and their guiding hand within months of each other. Founding member Thomas McClary left shortly after Richie, chasing his own solo path. The band carried on, scoring one more major hit with the elegiac Night Shift in 1985, a tribute to 2 soul legends who'd just died. But the version of the Commodores that conquered the world had already quietly come apart. We're at the halfway point of our countdown, and the next chapter takes us to Motown, where success and controversy often traveled hand in hand. The Supremes. Where Did Our Love Go? 1967. Reason for breakup. Berry Gordy's favoritism toward Diana Ross led to Florence Ballard's 1967 firing. Ballard died poor and largely forgotten in 1976. Three girls from the Brewster Douglas housing projects in Detroit, so unsuccessful in their first years at Motown that the staff privately nicknamed them the No-Hit Supremes. Florence Ballard, Mary Wilson, and Diana Ross had no idea that one of them was about to become the most famous woman in music, and that the other 2 would be left behind in the process. By the mid-60s, Berry Gordy had quietly begun a romantic relationship with Diana Ross, and the favoritism became impossible to ignore. The group was rebranded Diana Ross and the Supremes, a name change that publicly demoted Ballard and Wilson in front of the entire world. Ballard, struggling with the group's brutal touring schedule and her own growing alcohol use, became Gordy's target whenever something went wrong. By her own account, he would single her out in rehearsals, calling her overweight, blaming her for the group losing time off, grinding her down in front of the other 2 women. It came to a head one July night in 1967 in Las Vegas, right before a show at the Flamingo Hotel. Gordy grabbed Ballard's arm and told her plainly, "If you go on that stage, I will pull you off myself." She didn't go on. Her replacement, already waiting in the wings, simply put on Ballard's costume and walked out instead, as if she had never been there at all. Ballard sued Motown for $8 million in unpaid royalties and lost. The label's final offer was $2,500 a year for 6 years, along with a stipulation that she had no right to even say she had once been a Supreme. Diana Ross would leave for her own solo career just 3 years later, but her ending looked nothing like Ballard's. She left a megastar, with Motown's full blessing and machinery behind her. Florence Ballard, meanwhile, lost her ABC solo deal, lost her fortune, and by 1975 was living on welfare in a small house with her 3 daughters, her sister, and her mother. She died of a heart attack in 1976. She was 32 years old, and the group she helped build, the one that briefly outsold every act in America except the Beatles, had already moved on without her. We've officially reached the top 5, Not every group breakup begins with conflict, and our next story proves exactly that. The Emotions. Best of My Love, 1977. Reason for breakup. No real breakup at all. Gradual, amicable lineup shifts driven by births, marriages, and solo pursuits, ending with Sister Pamela's death in 2020. Four sisters from the south side of Chicago, taught to sing gospel harmony by their father in the basement of their own house. That's the entire foundation of The Emotions. And unlike almost every other group in this countdown, theirs is not really a story of a dramatic falling out. It's the story of a family that simply absorbed every wave life sent at it, one sister stepping out and another stepping in, for over 50 years. Sheila, Wanda, and Jeanette Hutchinson sang as the Hutchinson Sunbeams as children, opening for Mahalia Jackson before they were even teenagers. When Stax Records collapsed into bankruptcy in 1975, the sisters could have disappeared into music industry history along with the label. Instead, they reconnected with a Chicago musician they'd known for years, Morris White of Earth, Wind and Fire, who signed them, produced them, and helped deliver Best of My Love, a #1 hit and a Grammy win that turned The Emotions from Stax survivors into stars in their own right. But the lineup behind that success was never stable for long. Jeanette stepped away in 1977 to give birth, and youngest sister Pamela stepped in to fill her place on tour. Jeanette would return, then leave again years later. Pamela would leave for Motown, then come back. Sheila eventually departed the group too. None of these changes came from lawsuits or screaming matches. They came from marriages, babies, solo ambitions, and a family simply rearranging itself around the demands of life, the way families do. The real ending came quietly, the way The Emotions had always handled things. In September 2020, Pamela Hutchinson died after a long health struggle, on her own birthday. Wanda, the one constant thread running through every version of this group since 1957, kept The Emotions going afterward with her own daughter stepping into the lineup. There was no scandal here, no betrayal anyone needs uncovering. Just four sisters from a Chicago basement who built something that outlived every label, every lineup change, and almost every other girl group of their era. For the next group, family ties helped build an empire, but they couldn't prevent painful divisions. The Isley brothers, It's Your Thing, 1983. Reason for breakup. Repeated family splintering, the 1983 Isley-Jasper Isley spinoff, compounded by O'Kelly's death in 1986, Rudolph's retirement to ministry in 1989, and Marvin's diabetes-related death in 2010. What started as four brothers singing gospel in Cincinnati became, decades later, one of the most sampled groups in the history of hip-hop. But the Isley brothers' six-decade run came at the cost of repeated splits, repeated tragedy, and a level of financial strain that's rarely discussed for a group this influential. O'Kelly, Rudolph, and Ronald Isley built the group from doo-wop roots into funk royalty, eventually adding younger brothers Ernie and Marvin, along with brother-in-law Chris Jasper, to create the explosive six-piece 3+3 lineup behind hits like That Lady and Fight the Power. By 1983, after a decade of platinum albums, the band fractured for the first time. Ernie, Marvin, and Chris Jasper split off entirely to form their own group, citing financial struggles and creative friction with the older brothers. It wasn't a clean exit. It was a family business splitting down generational lines. The older brothers left to carry the Isley name alone. Then came the losses, one after another. Eldest brother O'Kelly died of a heart attack in 1986, just a year after the splinter group's formation, while the band was already trying to rebuild around a smaller lineup. Rudolph walked away from music entirely in 1989 to become a Christian minister, leaving Ronald as the only original brother still actively performing.
Come on, baby, sing it. Oh, yeah.
When Ernie and Marvin eventually returned to the fold in 1991, the reunion only lasted so long. Diabetes forced Marvin into retirement in 1997, after costing him both of his legs. He spent the next decade fighting the disease before dying in 2010. Ronald Isley, the voice carrying the Isley name for over 60 years, has weathered all of it. plus a federal tax evasion conviction in 2006 that landed him in prison while the band's legacy continued without him on stage.
Woo! Drifting on the memory.
Today, only Ronald and Ernie remain from a family act that once filled stadiums. The rest of the brothers lost to splits, faith, disease, and time. Few groups in R&B history have absorbed this much loss and kept performing under the same name anyway. Only 3 entries remain. What happened to our next artist still sparks questions decades later. The OJs, Backstabbers, 1982. Reason for breakup, founding member Frankie. Little Jr. vanished in the mid-1970s. His murder went unsolved for nearly 40 years until DNA technology identified his remains in 2021.
Some of these knives out my back. What they do?
This is the story most fans of the OJs have genuinely never heard. Because for nearly 40 years, nobody knew it had even happened. The OJs formed in Canton, Ohio in 1958 as 5 high school friends. And one of those founding members vanished so completely that even his own bandmates assumed he'd simply walked away from music and gone quiet.
All the time they want to take your place, the backstabbers.
Frankie Little Jr. was an early guitarist and songwriter for the group, co-writing tracks with lead singer Eddie Leverett in the mid-60s, before the OJs found their signature Philadelphia sound. When the band relocated to California chasing their break, Little grew homesick for a woman back in Cleveland and returned home. And not long after, he was drafted into the Army and sent to Vietnam. When his service ended, he never rejoined the band. Decades passed. Leverett would later say simply that they never heard from him again and assumed he'd moved on with his life. In February 1982, workers behind a machine shop in Twinsburg, Ohio, found a human skull in the snow, and then a garbage bag containing more remains. The medical examiner ruled it a homicide. A black man in his 20s or 30s, stabbed and beaten, his identity a complete mystery.
From my friends, yeah, what they do?
For nearly 40 years, those remains sat unidentified. A cold case quietly passed between detectives as the years wore on, until DNA genealogy technology, the same methods used to finally catch the Golden State Killer, gave investigators a name in December 2021, Frankie Little Jr., last seen alive sometime in the mid-1970s. While Little's disappearance unfolded in the shadows, the surviving trio of Eddie Leverett, Walter Williams, and William Powell was busy turning Backstabbers and Love Train into generation-defining hits. Powell himself wouldn't escape tragedy either. Diagnosed with terminal colon cancer in 1975, he died in 1977 at just 35, with his own family later forced into a legal fight just to claim royalties the label had quietly withheld from his estate for decades. 2 members of the same founding lineup, gone. One to disease in plain sight, one to a homicide nobody even realized had happened until DNA science finally caught up, 40 years later. Only 2 entries remain. The next chapter takes a very different turn, one marked by artistic ambition, personal tragedy, and extraordinary resilience. The Impressions. People Get Ready, 1970. Reason for breakup. Curtis Mayfield left for a solo career in 1970, was paralyzed in a 1990 stage accident, and died from diabetes complications in 1999. Few songwriters in American history carried as much weight on their shoulders as Curtis Mayfield did inside the Impressions. He co-founded the group as a teenager in Chicago, became its primary songwriter, and turned simple gospel-soaked harmonies into the literal soundtrack of the civil rights movement. Keep on Pushing, We're a Winner, and People Get Ready, a song so woven into the movement's identity that Martin Luther King Jr. himself was known to request it at gatherings. By 1970, the pressure of carrying that responsibility, writing, producing, performing, and running his own label, all while functionally being the Impressions' creative engine, had worn Mayfield down. He left the group, by most accounts amicably, to focus on a solo career, encouraged by his own business manager to capitalize on the moment. He never intended it as an abandonment. He kept writing and producing for the Impressions even after his departure, and his solo debut and the Superfly soundtrack that followed would go on to become some of the most acclaimed and influential albums of the entire decade. For 2 decades, it looked like Mayfield's story was simply a triumphant solo chapter, layered on top of a legendary group career. Then, on August 13, 1990, during a live outdoor performance at Wingate Field in Brooklyn, a gust of wind toppled a lighting rig directly onto him on stage. Curtis Mayfield, the man whose voice had carried the civil rights movement, was left paralyzed from the neck down in front of his own audience, in an instant, with no warning at all. he didn't stop. Mayfield kept recording for years afterward, in defiance of a body that could no longer move the way it once had, finally completing one last album, New World Order, before complications from diabetes, a disease that had quietly tightened around him for years. He took his life in 1999. He was only 57. The impressions he left behind in 1970 had already cycled through new singers and labels for 2 decades by the time he died. But the group's true breakup wasn't really a falling out at all. It was a stage accident that stole the rest of a genius's body, followed by a slow illness that finally took the rest of him. But while loyalty kept that group together for decades, the next story would be shaped by one of the most heartbreaking twists in soul music history. The Four Tops, Reach Out, I'll Be There, 1997. Reason for breakup. They never broke up by choice at all. The lineup only changed when members died. Payton, 1997, Benson, 2005, Stubbs, 2008, Fakir, 2024. After 44 years of total, unbroken loyalty. Every group in this countdown broke apart through betrayal, lawsuits, addiction, ego, or family conflict. The Four Tops are the one group on this list that never actually broke up at all. And that single fact makes their story the most quietly devastating one we have. Levi Stubbs, Abdul Duke Fakir, Ronaldo Obi Benson, and Lawrence Payton met as Detroit high school students in 1953 and made a private promise to each other. Whatever happened, they would stay together. They kept that promise for 44 straight years without a single lineup change. An almost unheard of streak in an industry built on splits, replacements, and solo defections. Levi Stubbs turned down a starring film role opposite Diana Ross because he refused to overshadow his bandmates. He turned down a solo career entirely, more than once, out of loyalty alone. Barry Gordy himself said Stubbs could have easily gone solo, but his love for the other 3 men kept the group together longer than any act Gordy had ever worked with. So if there was no lawsuit, no betrayal, no public falling out, what finally ended the Four Tops? Death did, one man at a time, exactly the way it ends any real unbroken family. Lawrence Payton died of liver cancer in 1997, the first crack in 44 years of total unity. The remaining 3 carried on as a trio, rather than ever considered disbanding. Levi Stubbs suffered a stroke in 2000 and was forced off the road for good, silencing one of the most powerful baritone voices in soul music. Obi Benson died of lung cancer in 2005. Stubbs himself passed in 2008, the man Motown's own founder called irreplaceable. Having sacrificed solo stardom for a brotherhood he refused to let go of. That left only one original top standing, Duke Fakir, who kept performing under the group's name for another 16 years, carrying 4 decades of loyalty on his own shoulders, until he finally retired in July 2024, and died 2 days later. Every other group on this countdown collapsed because somebody chose themselves over the group. The Four Tops never had that moment. They simply loved each other until the last one of them couldn't anymore. In a genre full of breakups born from betrayal, theirs is the only ending built entirely out of loyalty. And somehow, that's the one that hits the hardest.